Have you ever felt like you're just constantly drowning in information? It's a real struggle sometimes. Trying to figure out what genuinely matters, what's just noise and what's actually coming next that could, well, reshape things. How do you cut through all that? Well, hopefully we can help a bit with that. Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into distributed ledger technology, DLT. And look, this isn't just another tech buzzword floating around. It really feels like a foundational shift, poised to maybe revolutionize everything from global financial markets to how we interact with AI, even how we own digital stuff.
Yeah, and we've got a really fascinating stack of sources for you today. They really underscore the potential here. It's kind of staggering. I mean, imagine unlocking billions, maybe even tens of billions in operational savings.
Huh.
Our research points to estimates like up to $20 billion annually just in global clearing and settlement costs.
Right, and a lot of that is driven by automating processes using smart contracts. Exactly, and if that number doesn't grab you, how about this? A projected $16 trillion global market for tokenized illiquid assets by 2030.
16 trillion. That's transformative.
It really is. It suggests a complete rethink of how we buy and sell things like, I don't know, real estate, private equity.
Things that were previously very hard to trade.
Right. Making them accessible to way more people through this fractionalization idea. But it's not just finance, high-stakes finance. Our sources clearly show DLT is also reshaping, well, AI development and deployment,
Right.
paving the way for something called Verifiable AI and entirely new kinds of data markets, secure ones.
Where data can be exchanged, but privacy is still paramount.
Yeah, and it's the backbone for those, trustless smart contracts, the self-executing ones, and decentralized applications or DApps, things that run without one central boss, basically.
Which changes industries from gaming.
Right, gaming, where NFTs mean players actually own their in-game items with real scarcity.
To securing your data in the cloud, tackling big issues like data integrity, leakage, access control.
So yeah, this deep dive, it's all about giving you a shortcut, getting you properly informed, finding those aha moments that connect the dots without feeling totally overwhelmed by it all. We're going to explore how this tech could impact security, privacy, even trust itself in our digital world.
And what's so fascinating, I think, is how DLT just fundamentally challenges those traditional centralized models we're all used to. For centuries, really, our systems have relied on central authorities, intermediaries, whether that's managing financial assets or controlling data access in the cloud.
Always middlemen somewhere.
Pretty much. DLT introduces a completely new way of thinking, how systems are structured, and really crucially, how trust is established. It shifts from relying on maybe one single point of failure to a distributed network. Participants collectively verify things, record things. Trust is kind of baked into the network's design. And we'll be looking at those unique characteristics that make DLT so powerful. First, there's transparency. Authorized participants can see and audit transactions. That brings accountability.
Okay.
Then immutability. Once a record's in and agreed upon, it's cryptographically linked. It's basically tamper-proof. Changing it is just computationally impossible, practically speaking.
Right, that's the chain part of blockchain.
Exactly. And as you said, operating without a single central authority, it uses peer-to-peer networks, consensus mechanisms, no single point of failure.
Yeah.
Which naturally raises a big question. How do we actually harness all this innovative power safely and effectively across so many different real-world uses?
From high finance to cloud data.
Precisely.
Yeah.
How do we translate those core features, transparency, immutability, decentralization, into real, tangible benefits?
That shift you mentioned from a central authority to this distributed, verified network, it sounds incredibly powerful. But, for someone maybe deep in traditional systems or even just watching from the sidelines, it might also sound a bit abstract, maybe even risky. How do these DLT networks really build and keep trust without that central referee? What's actually going on under the hood?
That's a really crucial point, and it gets right to the heart of DLT's innovation, which is consensus algorithms.
Okay.
So instead of one entity verifying everything, the network itself collectively agrees on the state of the ledger. Different DLTs use different methods. You probably heard of proof of work, like Bitcoin uses.
Right.
Or proof of stake, which is common in many newer systems. But the core idea is the same. A majority of honest participants have to validate a transaction before it's accepted and permanently locked into the chain.
So the network polices itself.
In essence, yes. This collective validation, all secured by cryptography, makes it incredibly hard to cheat the system or falsify data. Trust isn't placed in one third party. It's built into the mathematics of the network itself.
Okay, so the network validates itself, acts as its own auditor, and that inherent transparency and immutability, those are clearly foundational. But how do those core properties specifically translate into unlocking those massive economic benefits we talked about earlier, like those multi-billion-dollar savings in finance? Let's dig into that $20 billion in clearing and settlement savings.
Absolutely. The current system for clearing and settling financial trades globally is, well, it's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
And pretty inefficient.
Lots of steps, lots of people involved.
Exactly. You've got multiple intermediaries, custodians, clearers, brokers. Each adds cost, time, and frankly, potential for errors. Our sources highlight that using DLT, especially smart contracts, lets you automate many of those manual reconciliation-heavy processes. A smart contract is basically, it's self-executing code. The terms of an agreement are written right into the code on the blockchain. Okay. Once it's triggered, say, by confirmation of funds, it automatically carries out the actions. Transfers funds, transfers ownership. No need for manual intervention or a third party.
Wow. So instead of waiting days, potentially, with different people checking things off, a smart contract could settle a trade almost instantly and automatically.
That's the promise, exactly.
Yeah.
This drastically cuts counterparty risk, operational costs, and those long settlement times. Imagine like a stock trade settling in minutes, not days. That frees up huge amounts of capital, increases market liquidity significantly.
Okay, I can see how that adds up.
That $20 billion annual saving, it's probably a conservative estimate of just the efficiency gains from streamlining these really cumbersome old processes. It's about cutting friction and human error.
And beyond just making things faster and cheaper, you mentioned that $16 trillion market for tokenized illiquid assets. Now, that sounds like a total game changer for wealth creation, for access. What exactly are these tokenized illiquid assets? How does DLT make this possible?
Right. So historically, certain assets, think big commercial buildings, fine art collections, private company shares, they're considered illiquid.
Hard to buy and sell quickly.
Very. They usually require huge amounts of capital, complex legal stuff. So access is limited to a pretty small group of wealthy investors or institutions. DLT changes this through tokenization. It allows these real-world assets to be represented by digital tokens on a blockchain.
So you could have digital tokens that literally represent ownership shares in an office building.
Precisely. And once an asset is tokenized, it can then be fractionalized.
Meaning broken down into smaller pieces.
Exactly. That multi-million-dollar building could be digitally divided into, say, thousands, maybe millions, of tiny tradable units. Each token is a verifiable, immutable proof of a share of ownership.
Ah, okay.
This fractionalization just dramatically lowers the barrier to entry. It could allow much broader participation, maybe even regular retail investors, in markets that were completely closed off before. It brings liquidity, potentially massive liquidity, to these assets, transforms them from something you might hold for decades into something you can trade much more easily, almost like stocks.
That's really fascinating. It's like democratizing access to these high-value assets.
Yeah.
Okay, shifting gears a bit. Beyond finance, you also brought up verifiable AI. With AI becoming so pervasive, so powerful, how does DLT help make AI models more trustworthy, more auditable?
Yeah, this is becoming critical, isn't it? As AI moves into really sensitive areas, medical diagnosis, financial trading, autonomous cars.
You need to be able to trust it.
Absolutely. Trusting the output of a black box AI is a huge concern. DLT offers a potential solution here by creating an immutable, transparent audit trail for the AI's entire life cycle. Imagine AI models where every piece of training data used, every parameter tweak, every decision made during operation, even the source code itself. It's all cryptographically time-stamped and logged onto a distributed ledger.
So hang on, if an AI makes a weird decision, you could literally trace back its entire history on the ledger.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Exactly. It creates this unalterable record. Regulators, developers, users could potentially verify the AI's fairness, its accuracy, its compliance. For example, in healthcare, you could perhaps verify an AI diagnostic tool was trained on a diverse, unbiased data set.
Or in finance, audit why an AI trading bot made a certain move after the fact.
Precisely. This level of transparency and accountability as well could be a game changer for building trust in these increasingly autonomous systems. It shifts the trust from just the developer to the verifiable data on the ledger itself.
That sounds like a massive step forward for responsible AI development, definitely. And what about those new data markets you touched on? We hear constantly data is the new oil, but how does DLT help us trade it securely? privately.
Right. Data is incredibly valuable, but sharing or selling it is often complicated by privacy worries and unclear ownership.
Yeah.
DLT can enable data marketplaces where people or companies can securely and selectively monetize their data instead of
Mhm.
uploading your personal data to some central server where you kind of lose control.
Yeah, you hope they look after it.
Right. DLT potentially allows you to maintain ownership. The data itself might be stored off-chain, but it's metadata, who owns it, who has permission to access it, records of transactions, that's all logged securely on the blockchain. And smart contracts can then enforce the rules of data usage. So for instance, you might grant a research firm temporary access to your anonymized health data for a specific study for a set fee.
And the DLT ensures they stick to the agreement.
And that the transaction is permanently recorded, all while preserving privacy using clever cryptographic techniques like zero-knowledge proofs, which can verify something is true without revealing the underlying sensitive data itself. It's really about giving individuals and organizations more control, more agency over their own digital information.
That is a powerful shift back towards, data sovereignty. Okay, and bringing it maybe closer to home for the average user or even for businesses. What about something as basic as securing data in the cloud, or even thinking back to gaming, securing your game assets? How does DLT play a role there?
Well, beyond just stopping unauthorized access, DLT can significantly boost data integrity and security for cloud storage. Think about critical records, healthcare, supply chains, where every single input, every change, every transfer is cryptographically timestamped and logged on an immutable ledger.
It creates a perfect audit trail.
Exactly. A verifiable chain of custody for your data. It virtually eliminates data leakage risks from single points of failure and gives you assurance the data hasn't been tampered with. Again, it's a shift from trusting just the cloud provider to trusting the cryptographic security of the distributed network. And in gaming, as we touched on, the impact on player ownership is, well, revolutionary. Historically, when you bought an in-game item, you didn't really own it. It lived on the game publisher's server.
And if the game shut down, poof, gone.
Gone. NFTs, non-fungible tokens, change that. They provide unique, verifiable digital ownership of those in-game assets recorded on a blockchain. These tokens offer provable scarcity, so an item really is unique or one of a limited run.
So if I grind for weeks and finally get that epic sword in a game, it's not just code on their server. It's a unique digital asset that I own, and I could maybe even sell it somewhere else.
Precisely. That's the vision. This creates entirely new, player-driven economies, both within games and potentially across different games or platforms. It gives players genuine property rights over their digital stuff. It empowers players, and it enables interoperability maybe down the line. That sword from Game A could actually be used in Game B.
Wow.
It fundamentally changes the whole player-developer relationship, creates much more liquid, vibrant digital worlds.
It really is quite a journey, isn't it? Seeing how these fundamental DLT shifts apply across so many different areas, from, multi-billion-dollar finance down to the very personal feeling of owning a digital sword in a game. It really underlines how interconnected and, foundational this technology might become. And when you hear about these capabilities, democratizing assets, securing AI, verifiable data, it's hard not to feel like we're maybe on the edge of something really transformative. And here's where it gets really interesting for me. Think back to the early days of the internet. A lot of people saw it as just a novelty back then. This public network, permissionless access for emails and basic websites.
A curiosity for many.
Right. But it fundamentally changed everything. How we connect, how we work, how we live. It created entire new industries, democratized information on a scale nobody imagined. So the question is, could DLT be on a similar path? Will this technology redefine trust, transparency, access in the digital age, much like the internet did for information?
If we try to connect this to the bigger picture, it's clear DLT isn't some magic silver bullet, but it is undeniably a foundational shift. Our sources consistently highlight the immense benefits, but also the very real ongoing challenges. Adoption isn't automatic.
Hurdles to overcome?
Big ones. Things like navigating different regulatory landscapes across countries. The significant investment needed to build new systems that actually work with existing complex legacy infrastructure, and achieving genuine interoperability, getting all these different DLT networks to talk to each other seamlessly. That's a huge puzzle. It's not just about inventing the tech. It's about designing entire ecosystems around it. Robust, secure, compliant ecosystems that can actually scale and interact effectively. This often means sticking to principles like, same risk, same activity, same regulatory outcome, making sure innovation doesn't just race ahead of necessary safeguards. So as you continue to explore this space, which is evolving incredibly fast, it's important to always question assumptions. Consider all the different perspectives involved in building these new digital frameworks. Which brings up another important question, I think. How do we ensure this wave of decentralization actually builds a more equitable and inclusive future, like some sources hope?
By expanding access, democratizing innovation.
Right, while also maintaining the stability and security that global markets and individuals absolutely rely on. We're in this period of really intense innovation and figuring out how to navigate those complexities. That's going to be key to unlocking DLT's true potential.
Well, we hope this deep dive has sparked some new ideas for you, given you some things to think about. What new possibilities does this technology bring to mind for your world?